we are going to be talking about the
Just say
1950
next
Federal
slide.
Census
Okay.
tonight.
Yep, then I can do
It's
it.
here. And now we just need to know how to get into it, where to find it, and what we're going to do with it. So next slide, please.
So next slide.
Okay, and again, we're just trying to figure out where we're going. So next slide. We're going to be starting with the location at the National Archives. These are the folks that house all the records. These are the folks that have the originals. And these are the folks that have done the initial scanning and making the digitized copies of them. So the address or the link to get to the National Archives to the 1950 census is on the screen. It is also on your handout, one of the top things there, so you don't have to be writing lots of things down tonight unless you want to. So this is the address. It was released at 12:01 on April 1st, so this is still fairly new, and I'm sure they're still working a few bugs out of it. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, when you click on that link, this is the screen that you're going to see. This is the link for the National Archives, specifically to the 1950 census. And you have a choice here. Get that out of it. You can either begin your search or you can look at some resources. So let's go to the next slide. If you scroll down on the page, you're going to see some of the other things, a listing of some of the other things that are on here. You're going to see how many population schedules. They do have quite a few Indian reservation schedules. So if you're doing Native American research, there's going to be lots of things for you to look at. There's enumeration district maps and all kinds of fun things to look at. So if you get to a point of not being able to find what you're looking for, look at some of these other resources. And I'm going to be giving you several different strategies of how to do searches different ways. So let's go on and start our search. So next slide. Oh, question first. One of the things that I did notice as I was going through, they have a section in their on their website. It's called Frequently Asked Questions. And I've pulled a couple of those tonight because they give good background and they give some really good answers. So if you don't know how to do something, somebody else may have had that question already and you can kind of go back in there. But say, for example, is there a name index to the 1950 census? And here it's saying, yes, there is. It may not be totally accurate because it was done with an optical character recognition machine and another machine trying to pick up what that was saying. So there are some problems with it, but it's better than nothing at all. And we're going to talk about how to deal with some of those problems and mistakes that are in the system right now. So next slide. Okay, so when you click on the Start Search button or the search button, this is the screen that you're going to get. And it's always good to pay attention to the tips that are listed because obviously it's going to help you be more successful. And I did put the tips on the handout so you don't have to write them down and remember them. They're there for you. But again, using the first and the last name of the head of the household. The one way or the one thing about the way the census was set up, the last name or the surname of the family is only under the top person or the head of the household. So for example, in my dad's listing, when we pull it up after a while, it has Otto Haas. Underneath it, it has Arlene, it has Donna and James. It does not have Arlene Haas and the surnames behind each one. So if you're looking for a specific surname, you really need to probably look for the head of the household and search it that way. You can try putting just a last name in. It might not be quite as successful. You can try doing a very specific search for a specific person. If that doesn't work, you might want to try broadening your filters a little bit so they aren't quite as picky. It doesn't make any difference on the spelling of the surname within reason. For most parts, they are going to have similar spellings or be able to pick up similar spellings and pull them up. So that shouldn't, if you don't spell the last name exactly right, or if it is misspelled in the system, you should still probably be able to find your entry. Also, there's lots of different things that you can check. For example, like the population schedules, the enumeration district maps, and I'm going to show you how to do some of those different things tonight. And then also, we're going to talk just a little bit about the built-in transcription tool that they have on their website. So we're going to get started. Next slide, please. Notice that over on the left-hand side of your screen, there was a place that said state, county, and then first name, last name. So we're going to put in Wisconsin. Next slide. And I'm looking for my dad and my family, and that would have been in Clark County. So I click on Clark. Before we go on to the next slide, as soon as you put the county in, I want you to notice that automatically all of the enumeration descriptions and designations for Clark County came up. They're semi in alphabetical order, but not completely. So if you're looking for the town of Lynn or Granton or whatever, they might be kind of in order alphabetically, but otherwise in this particular case, you have, I think, 61 different sets to go through. It's not as many as some of them, but again, you could go through it. So next slide. But we're going to try making it as easy as possible to start with without going through all of the different maps that are listed for Clark County. We're going to try putting my dad's name in where it says name. So next slide. And we put my dad's name in, Otto Haas, and we click on the search button. Next slide. Lo and behold, he comes up right away. It was that easy. You can notice, next slide, up at the top, we are in Wisconsin, we're in Clark County, and we're on Enumeration District map number 1029. It shows you which one we're on, and it has already pulled up the image that has his name on. Now I know that that's really hard to read because it's so small. There are tools on there. We are going to get into the specifics on that and start looking at different features in just a few minutes. But I want to go in and show you some of the other ways that we can get in to find this same thing. So next slide. Okay, and the question is, if my name search doesn't yield any results, how do I locate people? And what they're saying here, one of the ways is to go into the National Archives catalog and try pulling up your enumeration maps. So we're going to go into the next slide. When we go to the National Archives catalog, this is the screen that we see. And we have a couple different options at this point to find the 1950 Federal Census enumeration maps. We can either type it into the line, so next slide, which I did for the state of Wisconsin, or you can go to the button at the back where it says Advanced Search. Next slide, right there. Next slide. And this is the screen that you'll pull up. All you need to do where it says search term on this line right here. Again, all you'd have to do is put in that 1950 enumeration district maps for Wisconsin. Next slide, which is what I did. And up on the, behind where my little face is there, there is a search button and you'd click on that. So next slide. This is the screen that will come up when you do a search for the Wisconsin enumeration district maps. One of the things that I wanted to show you, and it happened to pull up some of Milwaukee's first. One of the things is if you're looking for somebody out in the country, it's going to be easy to find them in the rural areas because the enumeration district map, or the people that were included in that enumeration district, there's not as many as in the larger cities in that space. So say, for example, if we were trying to compare, trying to find people in Milwaukee versus trying to find people in Granton, there's a big difference. There's a lot more enumeration maps for Milwaukee, and I think there's like 288 for just Milwaukee alone. And I think Neillsville has 4 for in town, and then there's 2 additional attached ones. So you're going to have to figure out how to find the enumeration. So let's click on that second one for the enumeration for Milwaukee County. So just click. Okay. So the map for the city of Milwaukee comes up. It's pretty vague at this point. And you can see that there are going to be a total of 288 different enumeration districts for just the city of Milwaukee. Now, if you want to, if you have nothing else to do, and you want to go scrolling through all 288, you can do that. I myself don't have that kind of time. So what I like to do, I know that my family that was living in Milwaukee, not at this particular time, but they were living in the town of Lake, and they also had a business down on Wells Street. So what I want to do is, if I was trying to locate where that enumeration district would be, I'm going to blow up this map, and you can see that there is right here, there's a little toggle switch that you can slide around and it will make the image larger or smaller. So next slide, please. Okay, we blew it up, and you can see I happen to be able to find the township of Lake right here. And you can see that there is an enumeration district of 40.81. There's 40-72, 40-73, there's 40-82. So I'm narrowing down my search maybe to, unless I know exactly where he was located at that point, at least I've limited the maps or the numbers of the enumeration districts down to a few, rather than all 288 in Milwaukee. Okay, next slide. If you still have problems, and say, for example, you don't know exactly where they lived, there are some other things that you can check on. There's a site, a lot of people just call it the Steve Morse site or the Stephen P. Morse site, whatever. But he has some things on there that definitely help the 1950 census searchers. So if you, again, if you click, and that will take us to that link. Next slide. Okay, this is his site. It gives some background information about the 1950 census. But what we want to do is to go up on the top, right under where his name and Joel's name is, there's 2 different boxes. We want to click on the second box, My Other Web Pages. That one right there. Next slide. And when we do that, this is the screen we get. This is going to be helping us find the enumeration districts. So in this first column, the menu box over on the left-hand side, we want to go down to the third item that says US Census. Next slide. Right there we are. And we're going to click on that. Next slide. And we have another drop-down column. At the very top of that, under the word overview, we have something that's called the Unified 1880 to 1950 Census ED Finder. That's what we want to click on right there. Okay, next slide. This is what we will get when we click on that. We want to make sure, and again, this is going to help us find a location if we don't know exactly where they're at. We want to make sure that at the top where it says Unified, there's a box there. 1950 is already in it, but we want to make sure that 1950 is in that box. And then we're going to want to start going down to where it says state, county, and city and town. So we'll click on state. Next slide. Oh, yep. Okay, got that one. Next. Okay, we're in the state area. We've gone down to Wisconsin. We clicked on that. Next. We're going to go to the county. We're going to click on Clark because that's where my family lived. Next slide. And then it doesn't give you, at this point, it doesn't give you a drop-down menu. Because Clark County has so few specific locations in it, it was kind of weird how they did that. But say, for example, we'll click on that and see what comes up next. Next slide. Okay. I wanted to check Neillsville, so I typed in Neillsville, which is the county seat. It's only about 11, 12 miles away from where my parents lived. As soon as I put in Neillsville, you notice down in that bottom left-hand corner, there are 6 different enumeration districts that popped up right over here. So what that is telling me is if I want to, I can go through all 6 enumeration districts to try and find somebody if they were living in Neillsville. Or I'm going to try looking for my family though. So next slide. We're going to do it a little bit different way. We're going to try looking at the maps for Clark County. So next slide. This is the overall enumeration district map for the Clark County. You notice that Clark County in its entirety only has 61 enumeration districts. It's a far cry from 288 in just the city of Milwaukee. But I still don't want to go through all 61 to try and find my parents. So I'm going to try, I know where they lived, I just don't know off the top of my head what their address is, but I can find it on a map. So let's blow this map up. Next slide. And we can see that in the center, we've got Neillsville. Off to the right, just a little bit, we have Granton, still kind of hard to see. So let's blow it up a little bit more. Next slide. Okay, here we can see we've got Neillsville. And it's kind of in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Notice that in that weird shape for Neillsville, they have 10-34 to 10-37. That's 4 districts. Remember when we looked the other way, there were 6? So what that's telling me is that in this specific area, inside of the city itself, there's 4 districts. But they had also attached 2 other ones because some of the outskirts were also considered probably part of the town, but yet they weren't directly in town. So there are ultimately 6 to choose from in Neillsville. But if you're looking in the city proper, there were only 4 maps to go through. But we're going to follow Highway 10 out to Granton. Granton is right up by the box where I'm up on the screen. And Granton has 1 enumeration district, 10-14. Piece of cake. Now that's what our mailing address was, but we didn't live in the or in the village itself. We lived out in the country. So Natalie, next screen, please. Okay, there we're showing Granton. Next screen. Okay, what we've done, we've moved just a couple miles to the east, and you can see the little town of Lynn there, where the arrow points. Our farm was right on that corner of County W and Highway 10. So right at the tip of where that arrow is where our farm was located. Now I'm looking at the map. What do I see for enumeration districts nearby? 1029. Yeah, 1029. So now I would be able to go back and plug in the enumeration district of 1029 and just sort through that one specific. I'd still have to go mile by mile, but it's a lot less than going through multiple district maps. Next slide. And there it is, the 1029 in the town of Lynn. Next. Okay, we're back to that enumeration finder again. And another way of doing it, like I had typed in Niels before, I'm going to type in the town of Lynn. Let's see what happens this way if we type it in without going and looking for the map. Next slide. Now, I had already typed in the system before when I was doing my search, my dad's name. So the system remembered that. And look what shows up down at the bottom of the screen. 1029. So I know that that's the district. I've proved it several different ways. And now you can click on that 1029. Next slide. And it will bring up Enumeration District 1029. And I can click on that or actually click on the population schedules and start going through them. Next slide. Or I can try putting his name in again and hitting the search button. Next. And that same slide comes back up from way back in the beginning when I used the Finder on the National Archives website. So I've used two different sites and found the same thing. Questions so far? Okay. Now, what is some of the information that we're going to find on here? Next slide, please. One of the things that we're going to notice that at the bottom of each of the slides, it's going to be showing some of the names that they are pulling out of the census. You can see here for item number 8, they have Hayes Otto. There's a misspelling there. And so that's something that needs to be corrected. We'll take care of that a little bit later. My mom's name is Arlene, and they have Aileen or Eileen, however you want to pronounce that. My sister is on line 9, and they have Games instead of James for line 10. So a couple things that might need to be fixed, and I can go in and tolerate that. Our neighbors were Arnold Knowles and his wife Ermine. Next down the line was the Stranitzkys up on the hill. So yeah, these are all neighbors in the area. So I know I'm in the right spot. Okay, let's look a little bit closer. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, when I did the search in that enumeration district and I had Haas on the screen, it went through that whole district and it pulled up any other place in the district that had Haas. Now, about a mile down the road, my uncle lives or used to live with his wife. And you can see number 9 is Haas Albert with Lois. We also have a Herman Haas on line 7. That was my grandfather. He's listed again on line 9. I'm not exactly sure how that was, but they are listed in there. So it will pull up other names in that enumeration district with the same last name, if you know, and sometimes that's helpful. Next slide. Okay, let's see what else we can find in here. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. There was that little circle thing up in the top that had some little dashes in it. That was what we open up to get to our toolbar, which just came up across the top. Next slide. We'll find out what some of these stand for. So the one that split half dark, half light, that's, we can invert colors. And notice what happened to my census record here when I did that. It did a negative effect type thing, which is like, gee, that reminds me of some of the old ones I used to go through, but you know, sometimes it's easier to read them if you invert the colors that way. There's just, sometimes it's easier to read them. So that might be an option. Next slide. Okay, we have a contrast, and the next one where that little sun is next slide, is brightness. We have the next one is the two little arrows, and that's going to flip our image. So whatever happened to be over on the left-hand side before flipped backwards and is now over on the right-hand side. So I'm not sure why you need that feature, but they must have thought there was a need for that one. And then the last two are rotating to the left or rotating to the right. Okay, let's go and see what else we can find on the census records. Let's get into some of the specifics. Next slide, please. Okay, what I've done is pulled it up a little bit closer. If you look to line 7, which is this line right here, and we followed across, it says Haas Otto head, meaning the head of the household. Now, it's readable, but if I look to see what some of the columns are up at the top, I'm really having a hard time. So it gives me that feature. I can still blow it up even farther. So next slide. Oh, and there's his name. Next slide. Okay, so what I did here, I did a little cutting and pasting. I pulled out the categories across the top, and then I pulled out their section and matched it up so it's nice and easy to make that comparison of what different things stand for. If you look at your handout, I have all the questions numbered in your handout to make it a little bit easier for you. Because I do know that some of those words up there are a little blurred, they're a little hard to read, but you do have all the categories. So we can find out he was living in this house, I believe, a year ago. Is this the house? Oh, I'm sorry. Line number 4 says yes, and that means that he was living on this farm. It's a farm that he's living on, or that's where the dwelling is on a farm. And then line number 5 asks if this house is on a place of 3 or more acres, and it doesn't have anything there because for some reason they must have figured because it's a farm, it's going to be more than 3 acres. For some reason, they didn't put an answer there. And I do know for the most part, 1950 was one of the last years from what I did as far as reading where they had census takers going out and getting most of the information from the people themselves. It was not a self fill out and mail it back in. So 1950 was probably one of the last years where the census takers were going out and trying to hit every single household. All right, so we know that he's the head of the house. The next one is line number 9 is race, and we can keep going down: male, female, his age, marital status, and he was born in the state of Wisconsin. We'll slip over to the next slide, which will show us the other half of the page. Line number 15 asked, was this person working? unable to work, keeping household, or doing something else, which is the other or OT, most of last week. And his particular answer was that he was working. I would hope if you're on a farm that you're milking the cows and taking care of them. So yes, he was probably out there working. There are some other questions in there that pertain to the answer from number 15. And evidently they didn't think they were important enough that they needed to put answers down for him. They're asking other people if other people in the household were working, those types of things. And then the last question, number 19 there, where he has an 80 by in the square, they asked how many hours that he had worked last week. And he had worked 80 hours. So yeah, he was a busy farmer. It was not a 9-to-5 job. He was out there a lot more than that. Again, the kind of work, he was a farmer. The industry was on a farm. And then question number 20C was, what kind of work was he? Was he a private employer? Was he working for the government? Did he have his own business? And usually when you own your farm, you have your own business. So there is an O there. The numbers, I'm not exactly sure what they are. Again, that was something that the enumerator filled out, and I'm sure it's some coding or something that refers to another chart, possibly the agricultural chart, which is another thing that they talk about later. Okay, next slide. Okay, on the chart, and if you want to just take a quick peek at the last page of your handout, you can see that there's little tabs every so often. Those are the sample lines. And what they did for these sample lines, they asked some additional questions of those people. They weren't always the head of the household. They might have been the wife, they might have been somebody else living in the house. But there were some other questions that they asked those specific people. And that information gets taken and put into the bottom part of the form. So each of those little tabs that are up on top, the numbers, and my dad is on line number 7, you would go down to the bottom part and find where number 7 is. And we'll look at some of those things. Next. Next slide, please. Natalie. Thank you. All right. We have the bottom portion of that form and what was filled out on there. Dad's information is the second set where it says number 7, which is right up here. And so what I'm going to do is kind of what I did up in the top. Next slide, I'm going to split screen it and kind of match it up together, hopefully. Okay. Well, okay, this works. So you can see what the headings are up at the top. I've kind of highlighted the line where he's at so we can follow across real easy. It's asking, was he living in this same house a year ago? And he said, yes, he was. It also asked, was he living on a farm a year ago? Yes, he was. And was he living in this same country? Of course, he was. So those are some additional questions right here. And then they want to know if the county, they want to know what county he was living in. And he said Clark, and it was in Wisconsin. So then we go on to line 25. Line 25 talks about what country his parents were from. And that's over where you see the 2 US's. There's the top line is for father, the bottom line is for mother. So both of his parents were born in the United States. And then the last question that you see there for line 26 asks them how many years of school he went through. And he went through 12 years of school. He had a high school diploma. And then let's go to the second half of the page. Next slide. And you can see again, did he finish that grade? Yes, because he did get his diploma. Has he attended school anytime since February 1st of 1950? No, he has not. But again, they're asking that because it might hit a child, you know, as they're bouncing down those every so often up on the top, it might be one of the children. And so you'd get some additional information that way. Going on to line 31, we look at 31B, he made $2,718 on the farm. So not a lot of money. And that was last year. So that was for the year of 1949. That's what he took in for the farm. Not a lot of money. Yeah, true. And then it asks how much money he received from any interest or dividends. With only having $2,718, they didn't have an awful lot of money in the bank. So they didn't have a lot of interest and things like that. And then it goes on a little bit farther in line 32, it talks about, or it's asking questions about how much money other people in the household, for example, like the wife or any of the other family members are making, and nobody else was working at that point. So, okay, next, please. Okay, so we're going back to the original schedule. Next line. Okay. Remember I said I was going to show you how to go back and change things. So underneath where my face is up there, there was a line that says, help us transcribe. So I clicked on that button and that little thing came up that says our collection of names is computer generated. And it would like it, they would like our help to help verify addresses or fix names, those types of things. So what we need to do is to get started. So we click on the get started button, next frame. And they want your email address. So I did that and I hit enter, next slide. And a little code popped up. And so what I needed to do was take that code number, the 801078, and put it up in that box where it said code. Next slide. Which is what I did. And then I hit enter, next. And it says you are ready to transcribe. And then it says begin. And so I hit that button, next. It asks, what line do you want to correct? Or what line do you want to work with? And of course, we know Dad's line number was 7. So next line, or next slide is 7. And now I want to add a transcription to that. So I hit that tab button. And this slide comes up. It asks for a prefix if it says Mr. or Mrs. or whatever. He didn't have that. It just had his last name, which is what needed to be fixed. So I put in the correct spelling, next. And I put also in his first name, and then I hit enter. Next slide. And it asked me if this is the information that I wanted to submit. And I hit submit again. Next slide. And it said, thank you for submitting the transcription.
Go into those and it's spelled wrong, that you can go into the census like you done and change all that, and you can, right?
You can change anything that's on those lines.
Yep.
Because like when I was working on it this morning, you're gonna find a lot of boxes that'll say blank, because it's blank on there. And the but down on the indexing that the machine did, we'll have it all filled in,
Mhm.
but there's nothing in the in census. One of the things that too that like Vicki mentioned before with the names, they were supposed to just put the last name and then done. But some enumerators might have did dittos, or they did a little just to show that they had it there. The minute they did that, it eliminated the name. So that's one point of knowing what your name is for your family name, because if somebody did dittos or something like that, machine read the ditto as another person in another household. It's
Yeah.
there, but it won't be in the index. And a lot of one of the things too, like with street names and house numbers, they got in the wrong boxes. So if you're looking for things like that, it'll be in the wrong box. I did about probably about 5 pages of all the names, not just the name, because I just did them down the floor.
We have Kathleen is talking here, and she's talking about she's worked with the schedules, and she's been doing lots of corrections on them. And she's also talking about when the enumerators went out, or the census takers went out, they didn't always follow the directions correctly. And so sometimes they were putting ditto marks in for the last names. Well, when the computer program read that, it read it as something completely different. And it threw it out from being Arlene Haas to just Arlene somebody. Yeah. So it's there, but it's not.
Even like made a wrong scribble with a pen or something like that. It read it entirely different. I mean, like I said, I was going through this morning because I knew we were going to be doing this tonight, and it was amazing the errors that were on there.
One of the things that's really interesting, and Kathleen was talking about a lot of the different errors that were made. One of the things that when we go back into some of the resources and some of the other things that are on this website, you can actually watch some of the tutorials that the census takers watched as they were being trained, and some of the directions that they had. So all those things are in here for you to look at, and it's kind of fun. And there's a lot of other information that you can find about the area. For example, it will tell you, and I'll show you that in just a minute, but it talks about population and how it changed. So at this point on this transcription, I could add another transcription. I wanted to get the presentation done, so I didn't do all the changes at that point, but I can go back in at any time and fix my mom's name and my brother's name, and that's all you need to do. What they said, and up at the top there, it says your transcription will be published within about 24 hours, depending on the moderator's approval. So what they have is somebody at the National Archives or working with the National Archives, probably from home, going back through and receiving all of these corrections and double checking them to make sure that they're.
Vicki, do you know if, when I was working on it this morning, I was going through Family Search. Are they sharing the different organizations, or does each one of them have their own set of corrections?
As far as I know, each group is making their own corrections in their own system. Yeah, somehow they were able to download the images to each of the sites, and I'll share the sites are at the bottom of the page there for 1950.
So
but
would mean if you looked at the archives and a couple of other sites,
You might have to try different things.
you may
the indexes might not be the same.
Yeah. Well,
And some of the groups like Ancestry, Family Search, they're still working on their, as far as I've been able to see, they're still working on their indexes yet. Their indexes are not complete. So that's why I chose to do the National Archives, because they have some type of an index up there. It might not be perfect, but they do have something for searching, or at least you can get into the different maps and find locations and find the population schedules.
I just got this, my criminal mind is.
Uh-oh, Noreen's criminal mind is working. Okay, Noreen.
Slide in place, and I have visions of malicious
Being able to change something.
changes.
Well, and that's why they have a moderator go back through, and before it's permanently put into the system, he's gonna okay that correction. Yeah,
But it is weird. Like, one of the one I got a really big laugh out of this morning was the fact that there was 3 men, a father, a son, and a neighbor. Every one of them, their job was listed as wholesale retail florist, all 3 of them. But in the census, but in the index, the father was listed as a mechanic, the son was listed as a grocer, and the neighbor was listed as a repel florist. Repel, R-E-P-A-L. And everyone was exactly written correctly, and it was readable. It wasn't like you had to sit there and go look at it, but that machine read it as a mechanic, a grocer, and a repel florist.
yeah.
And that I mean,
So Kathleen's just
Exactly.
sharing information about how the
those machines.
the machines, yeah, the optic character recognition machines can read things differently
That aren't even there.
and put them into the index. And so you really do need to go and check to make sure things are accurate. And that's why they have that transcription tool on here. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, as I mentioned, if you go into the resources, one of the things that you're going to see, and you can kind of see where it says frequently asked questions, and it's right there, FAQs. You can click on that, and the list is probably almost twice to 3 times as long as what you see here. But if you have specific questions, somebody, like I said earlier, somebody else probably already had that question, and so they have an answer for it. Next slide. So if you click on one of those questions, it will take you down below where all the questions are, and it will give you the answer. And you can see here, is there a name index to the 1950 census? That was the information that I had put on one of the slides, because I thought, well, that's something that we're going to want to know. Is there a name index? Also, that first slide talking about when they opened up the slides, or when the schedules were available for people to first see. There's a lot of information in there. It goes in, it talks about the Native American schedules. There was something else that I saw in there about the infant cards, and I wasn't sure what an infant card was. But what they did is, if there was an infant in the house, they had a special little index card that they had to fill out. And then what it says on there is, after the information was into the system, or after the census was done, all the infant cards were destroyed. Exactly the information on there, I think if you go into the frequently asked questions or into the resources, it talks about the different forms. And I believe there's an example of what that infant card looked like and the type of information that was on it. So again, there's lots of cool things to go look at in the census. Next frame, please. Okay, here are some of the resources. And again, that's another section that's up on the top. Again, it shows those frequently asked questions, all of the 1950 census forms. And again, that's probably where that infant form is, if you want to check that out. Other questions that were, or the questions that were asked on the census, and you have a copy of those in your handout. Instructions for the enumerators and the public. And I think that's where you go in and you can actually, down farther too, it has the training videos right there that the census takers actually watched, so they'd learn how to do things. Just a lot of cool information, maybe not necessary to your family, but there's some cool things in there. Next one, please. Okay. In that resource area, there was also some external resources, what they did, they looked at some of the information that they gathered and they started compiling different things. The historical facts is really cool. It talks about different things that were happening during 1950. It talks about movie stars. It talks about all kinds of things. So you can get a little taste of, you know, what your family was being exposed to at that period in time. The next line, I think it's the third one down, publications. I want to show you something in there. So I'm going to click on that one. Next slide, please. As I said, they started compiling information from these census forms right away. And there's one in there specifically on census of population by state and by county. So I'm going to click on that one. Next slide. And I want to see if I can find anything on Wisconsin or maybe Wood County. So I'm going to scroll down. Next slide. And I get to a point, it will let me pinpoint a specific state. So I wanted to click on Wisconsin. Next, please. And this is the report that was done by county for the state of Wisconsin, dated April 1st, 1950. I think it's pretty cool. It is, I believe, 7 pages long. It's not real long. And so as you scroll through it, it will give you information county by county. Let's go to the next slide. The very last page, yep, page 7 at the top. And for some reason, that last page was a little crooked. Everything else was perfectly straight. Gets to Wood County, and of course it has to be crooked.
But then your face isn't over it.
Well, that's true. That is true. Okay. Kathleen just said my face isn't over it, so that's good. All right, so let's look at Wood County. We can see that the preliminary count, April 1st, 1950, it was 50,524 people in the county of Wood. Compare that to a year before that, it was only 44,465. Yeah, 10 years before that. They even have it worked out, the percentage of change, 13.6. We can specifically go to the next line. It says Marshfield City, and that's where we're sitting tonight for those of us that are here physically. And we can see in Marshfield in 1950, April 1st, we had 12,377 people. 10 years before that was only 10,359 people. So a difference of about 2,000 people, and they've got that percentage figured out at 19.5%. So some, you know, interesting information. You can also see, do some comparison, other towns in your county. You know, Wisconsin Rapids sometimes seems to be a rival with Marshfield for different things. You can see at that point in time, they were just a little bit bigger than we were. Not a lot, but that has changed over the years. So again, some interesting information. Next slide. Okay. We briefly touched on earlier how some of these other sites like Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage, all these different things, they're all going to be having the 1950 census on them. Where they are at as far as indexing is not necessarily going to be the same. They were able to get the images from the National Archives because those are public, but the indexing itself is a different issue. So a lot of, I know Ancestry is working on their own set of indexing, Family Search is doing their own set of indexing, and I believe probably MyHeritage is as well. On your handout, I gave the direct links to the 1950 census area on those sites. And when you click on them and go do your searching later on, because I'm not going to pull those all up, but you'll see they'll tell you different stages that they might be in as far as, you know, they need help or whatever. So as with the 1940, we were helping indexing that for a while. It got done a lot faster than probably any of the other indexes had, but it still took a little while to get that one done. So those are some sites that you might want to check out. And again, the links are there. Next slide, please. Okay, we're getting to the end. Hopefully by now you've been able to figure out where to find your information. You can go into the National Archives, or you can go into these other sites like Ancestry or Family Search, those types of things. What you're going to find there might be different from site to site. And again, what kinds of information you'll be able to find by using the whole schedule that we went through on the National Archives. We talked about at least 3 different search strategies of using the National Archives name feature.
Your attention, please. The library will be closing in 20 minutes. All of today's meeting room reservations are now expiring. If
Oh,
you're
no.
using one of our meeting rooms, please gather your things and exit the room. If you have materials you would like to borrow, please check them out now. The library will be closing in 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I guess we need to finish up here, and we're right on task. So again, those 3 search strategies that we were talking about was using the name feature directly on the National Archives site. We talked about going through and using Steve Morris's site for finding enumeration districts, their numbers, the maps, those types of things, and how you can use the maps and go back and find the enumeration numbers. So you've got a couple different strategies there. And we also talked about the frequently asked questions and all those different resources that I only hit the tip of the iceberg on some of those other resources. So there's lots of other information that if you were writing a family history, some of that information you could use to kind of give some background to what your family was going through at that particular time. And if all else fails, again, going back into the frequently asked questions, or again, going back into the National Archives catalog. And where I typed in the 1950 enumeration district maps, you could type in whatever information you were looking for, and you might be able to find what, they might have it listed someplace. So again, hopefully you picked up a couple things tonight. Next slide. Okay. This was from back in the 1950s. And the reason I wanted to share that with you, the last page of your handout, and I've got it up here. And for those of you that wanted, that are watching at home, just send me an email and I'll send it back to you. But this is what the form looked like. Notice this is an 8.5 sheet of paper as compared to the form that he's working on. It's probably about this wide, probably close to 2.5, maybe 3 feet. It's a good 2.5 feet wide. So this is a lot more compressed than what the original form was. So again, just take that into consideration. But that was one of the actual census takers, or that was asking the wife their questions about the family. And then if you have any questions, we'll go on to the last slide. Any questions? Natalie, anybody at home have questions?
There were just a couple that I was able to answer. That's why I was a little bit slow on the draw with the slides a couple times. But
Okay.
Yeah, they were asking about handouts and things. So I told them that you would email them.
And I apologize for saying next slide, but
No,
because
that's
of some
fine.
of the technical problems that we had here, that was how we had to work through it. Natalie's in a completely different area in the library running the system, and I'm in the Felker room giving a talk to people that are here. So it's getting used to technology and trying to give information this way. So if no other questions, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank those of you that are at home, keeping nice and warm and dry. Lucky you.
I do
Um,
have a quick question I just saw.
Okay.
Bev says, what was the URL for the 1950 census on the National Archives site?
The National Archives site, when I send you the handout, it's right at the very top. Otherwise, it's https:// the 2 backslashes 1950 census.archives.gov, gov. And that will take you right to that first page of the National Archives 1950. Hopefully that will help you out. Any other questions?
I just thought of something,
Kathleen has one here.
when I did the Roots Tech website, it mentioned the fact about, you were going to be able to search the military, personnel that were stationed across, like overseas and stuff. Did we have anything in this here that explained? I didn't run across it yet.
I didn't see anything about military. I did see a couple other things. For example, dealing with Clark County, there is a separate enumeration district for up by, can't think of the name, for the farm that's up on 29.
Wood farm?
Well, it's not the
County.
the county work farm or whatever they want to call it. They had a separate enumeration for that. And the residents there were enumerated by that location. Another thing that I read was in 1950 was the first year that college students were enumerated where they were living while they were going to school. So if they, for example, when I went to school at UW Stout up in Menominee, and I was living on campus or even off of campus, but up by Menominee, that's where I would have been enumerated. I would not have been enumerated back here at my home in Granton. So, you know, again, reading some of those extra things and going through some of the tips and some of those other questions, a lot of those things are answered in there, so you can pick up lots of things.
If anybody wants to, they still can sign up for the replays on the Roots Tech. You can just click in whatever you want to do too.
Yep. Kathleen was talking about Roots Tech and that you can go in and watch any of those sessions that were going on at that time. Anything else, Natalie?
Yes, we have a comment here that says there's a separate list for Norwood Hospital at Marshfield also. It's listed under other places under Wood County.
Yes. And that would be similar to the farm that's up off of 29 for the Clark County farm. It's very similar.
Are you talking the healthcare center?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. No, it's called the healthcare. It's a healthcare center.
Yeah. Anything else?
I've worked there.
Thank you again, everybody. Stay warm, stay dry.
Thank you,
Summer
Vicki.
is coming, I promise. Bye now.
I settled for spring.
Thank you very much, Vicki. Got a lot of comments saying thank you as well.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Good night, everyone.
So, would you like to give a talk or lead a discussion on what's going on in